Sally, welcome to the Sipping Point.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know. I wish I was sitting with you in Bordeaux, but that is going to happen next June 2026 when I bring my wine lovers from the US over, and we're going to have a very special dinner with you to hear all about your journey to wine and Château Georges 7. So, how did you come to own a chateau and a winery destination in Bordeaux? Was this like handed down to you, or what was your journey?
No, quite the opposite. In fact, I had a normal life before wine. I had a job and two children. I still have the two children. They're just a little bit older. And when my younger son was in his mid-teens, I decided to give up work and spend a couple of years being around him before he left for university, as I had worked in a corporate job all the time he was growing up. And then, as he was about to leave for university and I was going to become an empty nester, I decided to start studying wine. And I was looking for a project, and I was living the other side of France near Nice, down in the southeast corner. And I suddenly loved these wine studies, and it took me as a passion. And I started thinking about all the things that I love doing in life: renovation, hospitality, and this newfound passion for wine. And so I thought, why don't I make wine? And I then thought, where do they make good wine? Bordeaux. So I drove 8 hours across France and I bought a plot of vines and some old buildings. And I created a Château Georges set. Seven is set in French, so Château Georges set. And I created it from scratch.
Amazing. And the name, I mean, this is just very spontaneous. It's something people would probably plan many, many years in making such a, radical decision. So I love your spontaneity. And I guess, risk taking isn't a big thing for you, obviously. But what made you choose the name? I'm sure there's a significance to that.
Well, it was very important for me coming here and creating something new that I wanted to ensure we had a combination of both the tradition, the history, that we've got the heritage of winemaking in Bordeaux. So something traditional in the name. And George, I think, reflects that. It's a really good historic name, both in English and in French. So George, works well in both languages. People know how to, from pretty much any language in the world, they know how to say George. And then the number 7, written in a more modern Arabic script rather than Roman numerals, is a little bit more forward looking. So this balance of old and new in the name was really important, because that's exactly what we do here. Everything is a balance of tradition and innovation. And to top it all, when I lived in Paris, I used to work in the Avenue Georges V, which clearly Georges V, Georges set. And the next King George of England will be George VII.
Oh, okay. Well, we like that. That's wonderful. All right. So tell people, or, because Bordeaux is such an amazing region and has, different places that grow a little bit differently, the grapes and the wine tastes different. And when we go on our Bordeaux Uncorked tour next year, we will go to both the left bank and the right bank of Bordeaux, but maybe you could orient people to where you are in the region. And then I want to specifically talk about the wines that you make there.
Okay, well, I am on the right bank of Bordeaux, so that's the part which is to the east of the city. It's the part of Bordeaux which is known for mainly Merlot-driven wines. The most well-known appellation in the right bank is Saint-Emilion. Its neighbour is Pomerol, and the neighbour of Pomerol is Fronsac. So my appellation, Fronsac, is relatively small compared to some of the other appellations that we have in Bordeaux. It's only about 1,050 hectares. Multiply that by 2.5 to get the number of acres. But if you're looking then at maybe 2,500 acres for the appellation of Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. And we are so lucky because here we have most amazing soil. We have wonderful clay, which helps keep the coolness as we get this global warming, which heats up the soil and the earth. But we also have that lovely limestone plateau that comes across from Saint-Emilion. And Fronsac, for many years, has been very much an unknown secret. And we don't want it to be a secret because we can make fantastic, elegant, wonderful wines here.
Love that. And so typically, I know as a general rule, sometimes people will say the left flank are the harder wines because they have a little bit more Cabernet Sauvignon in them, and the right bank a little bit softer because more Merlot and Cabernet Franc. But lots of people forget that Bordeaux, they make white wine as well. We think red, it's kind of the king, I guess, of what we think when we think of Bordeaux. So before we get to the red bank blends that you make, tell me a little bit about the white wines that I think will surprise people, maybe especially here in the US, where maybe when we think about Sauvignon Blanc, we think about the Loire in France or we think about New Zealand. But you're making whites that include Sauvignon Blanc as well, aren't you?
Absolutely. So I make a Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blend, which is the classic Bordeaux blend. But what I do is I put the grapes to co-ferment in Burgundy barrels. So as soon as the juice has been pressed, goes into Burgundy barrels on the lees, the yeast deposits that come off and are in the barrel. And then we stir the lees every day for about 6 weeks, and then we leave it sitting on the lees. So it gives it a really lovely richness and mouthfeel. Although it is 70% Sauvignon Blanc, 30% Semillon. Semillon brings a richness, so does the wood, so do the lees. So I don't want a woody taste, but I just want a really long finish. So I'm very, very excited because I've just bottled the 24 of the Château Georges Set Blanc. This is a quick look at the bottle with the flowers on it that grow
Beautiful.
in and around the vines. And the 24 points, I've just received 24 vintage. I've just received a 93 points from Jane Anson. So I might
Wow.
still have some of that left when you get here next year. I'll save you a bottle
I
to
hope
try.
so. That'd be great. That'd be great. And, for some, Sauvignon Blanc can be kind of overbearing acidity, or maybe in some places it's made overly tropical. And I always appreciate French Sauvignon Blanc to be a little bit leaner. In this case, you have that Semillon in there. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't say soft, but softens the edges a little bit. And that the fermentation in the oak, as well as the lees stirring and the richness, really, I love that. It gives you, I think, more options with food pairing. What are your
Absolutely.
favorite things for Bordeaux Blanc to enjoy with?
So I actually started making this white wine when I created my tasting room, which you will see next year, out of an old tractor barn. And I've renovated it and made a beautiful space for people to visit and a terrace overlooking the vine. So hopefully you'll be sitting on that terrace watching the sunset. And I made this white wine to go with it. So I really wanted a white wine which has a freshness, but can go with all those lovely nibbles at aperitifs. What I do is a smoked mackerel pate, goes beautifully with this. I served it at lunchtime to a group of visitors from the US, and I have it up on my website. I also love it classically with goat's cheese, but certainly with a goat's cheese dip that is mixed with Greek yogurt, and then have some lovely shavings of goat's cheese on top. So absolutely amazing for aperitif, and then through clearly to things like a prawn and mango salad with some coriander, and obviously, a lovely light fish dish. So it's got a real roundness and it's got a fruitiness in it. So it pairs beautifully with the cheese, like goat's cheese, but also with things that have got a little bit more, range of flavors like coriander and mango and peach.
Love that. And while we're kind of sipping on that, I was wondering, you make this radical change in buying the property there and creating a chateau, but I guess you're kind of an outsider. I mean, you didn't grow up in Bordeaux, but did you have any, resistance to you doing this, or, did it take you a while to break into the club?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. I was already living in France, so I had a very good level of French. And I think that going to most countries, even if you're new to an area or to an industry, if you speak the language and can paraphrase, because if you don't have the exact vocabulary, I was studying wine in English, so I didn't have things like batonnage and so forth in French. I think, though, if you have the language, that shows immediately the locals that you are serious about being part of that culture. So that, I think, was key. Obviously, the other thing is that I started studying wine when I was 52. So this was very much a midlife change. And I think that one of the great things about getting to your 50s is you care a little less what people think, because actually you start wanting to please yourself a bit more. I purposely chose to create a wine chateau because I wanted autonomy. I wanted to be in charge of my destiny. I didn't want to train to be a sommelier and work in a team for somebody else. I wanted to have my own project. So that again was a midlife decision. Now, as I always say, the people around me, I feel that there is a certain respect for what I have achieved. I think at the beginning, they probably didn't take any notice. I bought very dilapidated buildings. I had no experience. They probably thought, well, we don't know. She's not going to do anything. But it has to be said that I think they respect me now. I have been now admitted into the Gentilhomme and the Gentilhomme of Fronsac, sworn in to promote the wines of Fronsac. So I'm part of the confrérie, which is quite a big deal. And
Mhm.
in fact, there is an article coming out in Decanter magazine in the Bordeaux supplement at the beginning of June talking about outsiders. And there it does talk about the fact that I've, just inserted myself. And quite honestly, Laurie, what people say behind my back, I'll never know. So I'm not going to worry about it.
That is such a great advice for no matter what you do. So I love that you share that. What all do you have there on property? What can people expect if they come visit you?
Okay, so I don't have a traditional restaurant. What I have is a tasting room with a wine lounge and with a terrace overlooking the wines, which is very
Mm,
much in the style of a wine bar feel. Again, blending old and new in terms of the look and feel. The lights are made out of my vines and this kind of stuff. So very laid back, very relaxed, not trying to be an old chateau, because that just isn't what it is. It's first generation chateau. But it's a very, very, I would say it's more of a new world style welcome that I give. I show everybody around myself. And then the type of food I do, in my youth, I did run a restaurant country inn in the Cotswolds in England. So I'm very used to cooking up a storm. And I make the smoked mackerel pate, I make the apple chutney, I make the hummus. And so I do a lot of sharing platters. At lunchtime today, I had 17 people who all had
lovely.
sharing platters, and we tasted wines and chatted about my story. And then I do special events, sit down dinners for special groups. But it's not a restaurant that is open every day. It's only to go with a wine experience. So I tailor it according to what people want.
Great. It's exclusive, and I'm looking forward to be part of the club soon. Well, let's talk red, because when people hear the word Bordeaux, they certainly think of red wine. I love the Bordeaux Blanc, and I hope people will go and seek that out as well so they can get a feel for that. But red is king. And in the US, I think it is probably 60-40 people that prefer red wine over white wine. And so tell me a little bit about the Fransac region and, the blend and the grapes that do best, the red grapes, of course, for your region.
Okay, yeah. So, as you rightly point out, if it's a wine from Fronsac with the label of Fronsac, then it has to be a red wine, just as the same for Saint-Emilion. So, if it's a white wine, even if it's grown in Fronsac, it will be a Bordeaux Blanc. So, my red wine, my main red wine, Château Georges set, which is here, is 100% Merlot. Now, as you know, Merlot is a very, very high percentage on the right bank. It is also a high percentage on the left bank. It's overall in Bordeaux, it's the most planted grape variety. And very, very proud to have Merlot because it's had a bad rap in recent years. And I love it when people come and I can show them just how beautifully complex it can be. So another really well-known winery, Petrus, is 100% Merlot. People don't think that. They don't know that. But
Mm-hmm.
that is one of the most expensive and exclusive wines in the world, and it's 100% Merlot grown here on the right bank. So my vines are about 40 years old. I mentioned the deep clay. As your listeners probably know, we cannot irrigate here in the old world. So our vintage is very much based on the weather we get for that year. And so therefore having good old vines with deep roots and a wonderful soil that holds the water for when we get those long, hot, dry days is really important. On this part of Bordeaux, where the soil is keeping that coolness, it means that Merlot doesn't get overripe, even in very hot
Mm.
years. So 22 was an extremely hot year, but my vines just kept on growing because they had those roots and they just kept on doing their thing right through the heat. I then take my Merlot and I put it straight into 500-litre French oak barrels. That's quite unusual. We do an optical sort, put it into the barrels, and then we do a cold soak, and then I turn the barrels by hand every day, twice a day, 360 degrees for a very gentle extraction. And what's happening is that the wood is already starting to work on the wines because it's really important, I feel, that we need to adapt to today's consumer. who wants to, the youngsters, like my son's age, they don't want to wait 5 minutes for a wine, never mind
Hmm.
15 years. So we need to make wines that are complex but approachable younger and get that combination. And by fermenting in big 500-litre oak barrels, I can do that. And then it goes into small barrel. So I'm going to show your people when you come all of that process, because it's kind of unusual to ferment in 500-litre oak barrels, but it means that even a young wine like I've got here, which is 2019, which is only my second
Hmm.
vintage, it's got really lovely sweet spice, cinnamon, cumin. It's got a smokiness, it's got chocolate, and that with a slow roast shoulder of lamb is
Ooh,
fantastic, I can tell you. With cumin and cinnamon, some Moroccan spices. It's perfect.
lovely. And you do so much of this by hand. Do you have other winemakers, or are you pretty much the main lady of the house?
So I have two amazing guys who advise me on what to do. And they also bring in help if we need extra help. So I set up this winery and I approached this project like any other project. You look at, what do I know how to do? Where are the gaps and how am I going to fill those gaps? It would be the same if I was setting up a pottery shop than if I'm starting a winery. What was amazing coming to Bordeaux was that I brought marketing skills, I brought my money, my passion, my renovation skills, all of that. And here in Bordeaux, we have a plethora of deep wine knowledge and knowledge of the region. So it was absolutely amazing to meet two wonderfully gifted men. One is my enologist, who obviously oversees the blending and strategy, and one who is much more on the practical side, but also with an amazing palate, to actually say, we know this soil here in your corner of the world, and we can help you. And so they have been with me since the start in 2017, and they helped me launch Château Georges set. So they will get me help if I need it in the winery. Sometimes, like 2024, I did all the fermentation myself. And I also have a young lady working with me over the summer, and she's doing some of the work in the winery because she's studying for the diploma, WSET diploma. So she's happy to get her hands dirty too. So yeah, it's a team effort.
That's great. And you mentioned a little bit about the younger generation, if you will. I know a lot of the talk in the wine world is about Gen Z and drinking less, maybe not feeling as connected to wine, or at least, that may be just more of what we're saying here in America. But what are you seeing in France with wine consumption and how you market or make your wines? I mean, you gave an example.
Yes, I think it's really tough because I think it's worldwide. I don't think it's just here. I was just in California, same issues of this sort of aging population of people who know about wine. And I actually sit and talk to my sons about this and say, look, how can we talk to younger people about wine? There are some obviously portions who are not drinking at all, who see that they kind of off alcohol, but there is a huge swathe of younger people who are into cocktails. So they are
Mhm.
drinking, they're drinking spirits, but they're not drinking wine. And I think that we have really let them down, because one of the most amazing things that there has always been in France was that the family would have wine at the table and children would learn about wine growing up. And I found that when I came to France. I was embarrassed that I had never learned growing up about wine because it wasn't a thing in England. It was gin and tonic or a sherry. And yet French people seem to have it, had managed that. They bridged the divide, that children would have a little bit of wine with a bit of water in at a very young age. The talk around the table would be about wine. And I think that that is still missing, even though, for example, my generation know a lot more about wine, have got into it. I don't think the chat around the table with young people includes wine, so they don't grow up with it. So I do find that a challenge. However, I make sure I make wines that are approachable younger. Clearly, I am not of their generation. So I had a group of young men here at the weekend, had a stag party, who came and spent the day with me on Saturday. And
A
I am
bachelor party, as we call
a
it.
bachelor party. Yeah, call it a stag party in Britain. I was absolutely thrilled because I never expected them to listen to a word that I was saying about the wine process. And they had so many questions. It was like a safe space where they could ask all those questions about wine that they've never really had anyone to ask. And it was fascinating. You could hear a pin drop, and I thought they were just coming to get drunk. And they just asked so many questions. It was wonderful. So we've got to find a way to talk about it. I have to say that personally, I talk about my wines always about the occasion. So when I talk about Prince, I talk about Friday night, I talk about barbecues, I talk about platters of charcuterie when the neighbors come over and how they never go home and you have to then turn on the barbecue and you can keep drinking Prince and so on and so forth. So I think we need to talk about occasions, but if you find the answer of how to engage that younger generation, please let me know. I'm trying, but I'm the wrong age.
No, it sounds like you're doing great. If you had a whole stag party listening to you talk about wine, so that's fabulous. I think here in the States, and you were just visiting California, as you mentioned, it's also an affordability factor. And yes, I'm always trying to recommend great affordable wines. And that's why I do think Bordeaux, there is so much wine made there that you can find a lot of great wine in an affordable price. Of course, there are wines that, are thousands, hundreds of dollars, all of these things. But just if you think of generally going to a restaurant, a glass of wine right now in the US, I mean, the starting price is $12 and you could go up to $20 a glass, depending on where and what you're doing. A beer is going to be $7. Maybe a cocktail is going to be 12 as well. But, it just seems like, wow, I could drink two beers for the same price as one glass of wine. And that seems like a shame. When you go over to Europe, Italy or France, you can get a really affordable Euro. Portugal, the wines were so affordable. I could not believe it. And really, really good. And so we don't have, the €5, €10 bottle of wine that's drinkable. And we just don't have that here. And so I'm not sure how to really solve that. What is the wine by the glass pricing in France like? Is it more affordable?
I think wine by the glass, it varies a lot. Clearly, if you're sitting in the port at Saint-Tropez, you're going to pay an extortionate amount of money for a glass of rosé, because I remember paying an awful lot, and that was a few years ago. But otherwise, you can have a very acceptable glass of wine for probably 6, 7, €8 a glass. Now, in some of the swankier wine bars, it will be more expensive. It probably is going to be €10. And it has to be said that a cocktail with lots of fancy stuff in it that is stronger alcohol looks a lot more value for money than a glass of wine, because I think that you need to, because you can look at a number of ingredients in a cocktail and say, I like pineapple juice and I like mint or I like strawberry. I get it, what it's going to taste like. Whereas understanding the nuances of the flavors of a glass of wine, if you order a glass of wine without really understanding the grape variety, you could waste your money and go, well, actually, that wasn't great. And so therefore, there is a need to understand a little bit more about wine. So if you wanted a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, to know that a New Zealand one is going to taste different from a Loire one, you have to have that knowledge. Otherwise, you might be disappointed if you like one or the other. This is what we need to get over. I think that putting more information on the bottles when people buy is really important. That is something I do on my labels. I put all the key information on the back of the bottle,
Very
when to
nice.
drink it, what to pair it with, how it was made. Because as you know, traditionally in France, apart from Alsace, we're not allowed to put the grape variety on the front. I mean, well, we weren't allowed. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
I think the wine industry has to make some adaptations. And I think we're now at a point where we really want to do that. And I think we need to go at it with several prongs. It's not just one approach.
Love that. You have so much knowledge. This is so great. And I have one more question for you, and then I know you have to get back to your vines. But if there are women out there who are looking to get into the wine business, maybe even start a winery of their own, what would you tell them? Any advice you'd like to pass along to kind of support that? And it doesn't have to be at 25, right? You said you did this, you were 50 years old when you were making this decision. So what kind of advice can you give us?
Well, I actually wrote a book last year to encourage people to make a midlife move. So that's my book, which is available on Amazon. This is all about, but it's not just about midlife. There's so much in there. But I think a couple of nuggets from that. This isn't particularly a book about going into the wine industry. It's about making a life change. But I think really key is go at your own pace, a little bit like you were saying earlier. Don't worry about what other people think. Do what is comfortable for you in terms of financial risk or your time and so forth. And really find something that brings you joy, because if you have joy doing it, your passion is going to come through when you try and sell it or when you communicate with people, and you're just going to love every day. And so that becomes one of your success factors, is to enjoy every day, which, I think is something that we all want to aim for.
Absolutely. And I love that advice. And you've been fabulous to have. If people want to find you online, where can they go to find out more about you and your wines?
The wine website is Château Georges with a number 7.com. So that's very easy. Chateau, as in French, George, number 7.com. And on there, you'll have all about my wines, all about my story. And there is also a link to my other website, which is sallyevans.co.uk, which talks a lot more about midlife change. And, it just how happens that I chose wine. And here we are.
Love that. Me too. I used to sell software. You never know where you're going to end up. Well, Sally, this has been fabulous. I just want to thank you so much for joining me on The Sipping Point.